Hello everyone, my name is Mark Philpott and I'm the host of the Global Travel Channel podcast show. If you haven't tuned in before, I interview people from all across the world about everything to do with travel. Well, hello and welcome back. It's great to have you all here for another podcast episode. I'm excited as always to be introducing another guest today. And my guest today was born in Austria. She's lived in Denmark, Germany and Iceland. She runs a travel blog. She runs a Facebook group for women's hiking retreats in the Scottish Highlands. She does walking tours in Glasgow. She runs a vegan website, has a PhD in film studies and co-runs a feminist film festival in Scotland. So I guess this is going to be a fairly boring chat, isn't it? She's a very busy lady. So why don't we get over now and meet my guest for today? And her name is Kathy Kamlitner. Kathy, welcome to the show today.
Hello, welcome for having me. Thanks for the invitation, Mark.
You're more than welcome, and we were just talking offline about how you are in fact a professional podcast guest. How does one become a professional podcast guest?
You're just a member of a lot of Facebook groups and you know many other podcasters and just force them to get you on the show.
Oh, is that what I'm doing wrong? I've got to join more Facebook groups. Okay. So you obviously enjoy podcasts, is that right?
I do. I listen to a lot of podcasts every day and I probably subscribe to more than I can possibly listen to in my time. So yeah, I love listening to them and I love being on them. I have quite a few friends who are bloggers who've started their own podcasts, and I always try and get onto them because I find it really exciting.
Yeah, they're really cool, aren't they? And I think in terms of it doesn't matter what kind of information you're after these days, there's a podcast about it somewhere. And there's so many great ones. Like I'm a bit like you. I have a kind of a connection to podcasts like I do to chocolate. There's no end in sight.
And so many flavors.
Yes, and so many flavors. Exactly right. Now, for the sake of my guests all over the world, we're going to 95 countries around the world today, and I would like to have them know whereabouts you're exactly sitting and talking to us from.
So I am sitting in my flat in Glasgow in Scotland right now.
Glasgow in Scotland?
Yeah. Why I sound a bit funny.
No, not at all. But I think a few people are going to be surprised where you were actually born because it's not going to be in line with your accent. But we'll get there in a minute. What I usually do is I offer my guests the opportunity to dedicate the show to someone special in their life. So who would you like to dedicate your episode to today?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. So I was supposed to go to visit my family in about 2 weeks. And obviously I can't right now. And so I would like to dedicate this to my two little nephews who are going to be 1 in July. And I've not seen them since August. So yeah, I'll dedicate it to them.
Fantastic. What are their names?
They're Lucas and Dominic.
Lucas and Dominic. Okay, well, they're 1 year old and, they'll be able to listen to the podcast in a few years' time, right? And they'll be able to they'll be able to hear that Auntie Kathy gave them this lovely dedication. That's very sweet of you to do that. So I'm sure their parents will be happy as well. I do a little bit something crazy with all my guests, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do crazy with Kathy today? And I thought, okay, you have a fairly unusual surname, just like I do, and I've got this really wacky website that I go to that tells me how popular your surname is in the world, right?
Okay.
So what I found out today was that your surname is the 508,165th most common surname in the world. Does that surprise you?
Not bad, actually. How many are there in total? I mean...
There's millions. Yeah, there's millions.
There you go. So I'm in the first 600,000. I think that's pretty good.
You're in the first. But the next statistic I'm going to throw at you is going to probably surprise you a little bit more because there's only 641 people in the world that have got your surname.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Can you see where they live as well?
Most of them, yeah, you can.
Wow.
So there's this really cool website where you can go and find out all this useful information. Obviously, I've got way too much time on my hands, and this is the sort of stuff that I do. And I found out, I thought, right, okay, well, my surname is actually the 35,000 most common in the world. And
Oh,
I thought,
wow.
I wonder if Kathy's is going to be close to that. But I was quite surprised that you came up at 508,000.
Wow, that's funny. I remember when I was a child, we once got a phone call from a woman in Spain
Yeah.
and who had our surname, and she said she's on the look for potential relatives, and she's just looking around for people who with the same surname. We weren't related to her, but I will always remember that phone call when I was a child that came, and it was so confusing that someone in Spain would have the same surname as us, because
Yeah.
it is definitely not a Spanish surname.
No. Well, as my guests are going to find out today, that the most common geographical location for people with your surname, and this is amazing what this website tells you, right? I can tell you where all your relatives probably are living, but most of the people with your surname live today in Austria, so that's no surprise to you, is it?
Exactly. No, not at all. I know quite a few of them, actually.
Okay, so why don't we get on and get past that little useless piece of information? But I thought that's something you can now take with you for the rest of your life, and you know that you're not a commoner because you're 508,000 most common name in the world, which I just find quite bizarre. It's actually giving me a bit of excitement. No, that's okay. That's okay. I said in my introduction before I got on to you today that you were born in Austria, you've lived in Denmark, Germany and Iceland. You run a travel blog. You run a Facebook group for women's hiking retreats in the Scottish Highlands. You do walking tours in Glasgow. You run a vegan website. And you have a PhD in film studies, and you co-run a feminist film festival in Glasgow. So I told everybody this is going to be a fairly boring episode today.
We'll talk about 5 billion topics for half a minute each.
Yeah. I thought, wow, where are we going to start? Like I'm into all of these things. So I thought, right, I want to try and get through as many of these as I can and as in depth as I can. So that's going to be my challenge over the next 60 minutes. I've only got 55 left now because I decided to start talking about people's surnames. But why don't we start with where you're born, because Austria is a beautiful country, and tell us about, well, how long were you there for before you actually moved?
So I was born in Vienna, grew up in the city, went to school there and went to university there. So I actually lived there for the first 24 years of my life, I would say.
Oh, brilliant.
But as soon as I finished high school, I kind of moved away, came back, that sort of thing, and then moved away for good.
So what was life like growing up in Austria, and in particular in Vienna? Was it good? Did you enjoy it?
I did really enjoy it. I mean, it was really good. It's not like I miss living in Vienna right now as a grown-up, but I think as a child it was lovely because Vienna is such a green city. There's so many parks. The area where I grew up in, I was equally as quickly in the city centre, right where, all the tourist attractions are, as well as out in the forest on the border or on the edge of the city. So growing up in a place where you can choose between, do we go to the museum or do we go for a walk in the forest? That's just great, I think, as a child. I grew up with 2 older brothers. There was always lots of, stuff to do with our family. Our parents took us cycling and hiking and all these things. So I really enjoyed growing up in Vienna, and it is a beautiful city, and there's a lot to do.
Yeah, it is a gorgeous place, and the fact that you're the first guest I've had on my show out of 120 plus people is, and you're the first one talking about Vienna. I do want to spend just a few more minutes talking about the beautiful place that it is.
I find Vienna is the kind of city where what you think about is classical music and art and kind of the highbrow cultural experience. But what Vienna is to me has a lot to do with outdoor life. Whether that is sitting in the museum's quarter, which is a big museum complex with a massive courtyard on the inside. So you can sit in that courtyard all day in the summer and have a few drinks and have fun with your friends. So whether it's that or going cycling on the Danube Island, which is a beautiful green island in the middle of the city, or as I said, going up into the forest on the edge of the city as well. So it's a lot about being out in nature. It's a very big city, so there's lots and lots of different things to explore in different natural areas. And then, I mean, Vienna is just this crazy place of a very kind of dichotomous relationship between culture and or high culture and the kind of more working class and normal people's culture, if you want to say it like that. So you can go to the opera one day and then you can go to the market, to the food market the next day, and just experience what people, the local produce that people sell and have on offer. So there's so much kind of opposites in the city that you can explore. It's actually quite easy to spend quite a lot of time there.
Yeah, I think the highbrow analogy you use is quite succinct for Vienna, because I think a lot of people from outside of the city would see it like that. But in reality, when you get there, what are some of the main types of businesses that operate in Vienna?
There's a lot of really cool independent fashion shops and labels in a certain part of the city where, in a shopping area of the city. So there's a lot of independent shops going on, a lot of really cool labels and fashion designers that just do something a bit different and all on a smaller scale. So that's a really cool industry in Vienna. And there's lots of cool design markets where they then will all gather and you actually get to see and experience many, many different artists and labels from all over the city. There's a lot of nightclubs and bars. So that's a huge scene in Vienna, particularly when it comes to electronic and proper nightclubs, grungy underground clubs, which is quite cool. I don't know what else. Well, have you found out anything that I don't know about?
I won't try and tell a local about their own city, but what's the best time of the year to visit Vienna, do you think?
Oh, I think it's about springtime, early summer. So it's May and June maybe. Because in the summer it does get absolutely rammed with tourists, particularly in the city centre. The outside areas are a bit better and a bit, there's more space and fewer people. But I think coming in the springtime, when you actually can sit outside, when you can sit outside in the vineyards or in the pubs, in the beer gardens, or even just the parks, when you can go for outdoor activities, cycling, swimming, and so on, I think, May and June would be the best time to visit. There's cool festivals then as well.
Now, because we've got 900 subjects to talk about today, we've got to limit our time on Vienna. So before we go off Vienna, can you give my listeners 3 things that they have to do if they visit Vienna?
First, I think you have to visit the Danube Island and go cycling or go walking, go swimming, do some sort of outdoor activity and really enjoy the green spaces that we have so close to the city centre. I think you should go to the Naschmarkt, which is a food market that is, I think, the oldest market in Vienna, and it's massive. It stretches for hundreds and hundreds of meters, and there's food from all places of the world, freshly prepared vegetable stalls. You can get the freshest ingredients. And you get a lot of tasters, so do come hungry and just get all the tasters in and you'll love it. You'll have such a great experience. And then the third thing I really like to do, now this is not as easy as it used to be because they changed the tram system slightly, but take a tram around the Ring Street, which is the street that goes around the very city centre. You might have to change tram a few times now, but it brings you past all the most beautiful buildings, the opera, the theatres, the city hall, the big museums. It just brings you past all these attractions and you can just look at them from the tram, and that's quite an iconic experience, I would say.
Whereabouts did you go to live after you left Austria?
So right after I finished high school, I went to live in Denmark for a year to do something called the European Voluntary Service, which is a great project or a big kind of opportunity for young people within the European Union to get a stipend from the EU and live in another EU country and work with a charity or an environmental organization. Some people live with a host family, which is what I did. Others live with other volunteers, and you get a small stipend from the EU and you get to experience another culture.
What a fantastic idea. Did you belong to this organization while you were living in Vienna?
No, but I did find out about it roughly when I was 16, 17, because I was looking into options where I could go abroad and live abroad for at least a year. And initially, funny enough, I actually thought about going to Scotland, to WWOOF. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's working on organic farms.
No, I haven't.
It's a great network. You can do it around the world, and basically you work on an organic farm in exchange for, a bed and food. When I told my mum, she wasn't too excited about that.
I bet, yeah.
So I eventually found out about this European voluntary service, and she was kind of okay with that because it was something official. There was, there was someone taking care of the logistics and finding a place for you to live and finding an organization to work in. So she was a bit more, she was leaning towards that, and that's how I found out about it. But I wasn't really a member before I went to Denmark. You kind of become a member to apply to go abroad.
Okay, so how old were you when you did that?
I was 18.
18, okay, fantastic. What was it like living in Denmark? Was that the first time you'd lived outside of Austria?
Yeah, it was the first time I lived outside Austria. It was the first time I lived in a small village. So I moved from Vienna, which is 2 million, has 2 million inhabitants, to a small town, a small village in Denmark, which had 2,000 people.
Right.
I lived with a host family. I had younger siblings for the first time, sisters for the first time, a dog for the first time. I didn't speak the language. So yeah, it was quite a big shock to the system, I think. And it took a while for me to get used to.
Do you remember the dog's name?
Leica.
Leica. There you go.
Yeah. She was a little shit. Apologize, excuse the language. She used to come into my room and dig through the trash can, so I did not enjoy that.
I would have put something in the trash can that Leica didn't like.
She loved everything. She was, honestly, she would have eaten anything you gave her.
What kind of...
Bless her, though.
What kind of dog was Leica?
She was a beagle.
A beagle, okay. Beagle.
Yes.
So could smell things from 50 miles away.
Yes, exactly. And could bark until the end of time. But she was lovely.
So what was the biggest difference about living in Denmark after Austria in terms of, everything to do with food and customs and all that sort of stuff?
I mean, food was a big part of it because it is such a different food culture. I think the biggest difference was just living in a smaller place. And moving into a country with so much, such a small population. I was quite far away from Copenhagen. So it was a 5-hour train ride to Copenhagen, I think, which you almost can't imagine in a country as small as Denmark. So I think it was living in this small town area, quite a rural area with a lot of farming. It was actually really nice because I could just get on my bike and cycle out of the village and be in the countryside. So I think even though Vienna is such a green space, having all this open space, all this freedom to just be out in nature was a big change for me as well, I think. And then the language was just mad. I mean, it's a language that looks so different than it sounds. And then if you try and pronounce it, they say it's like having a hot potato in your mouth while you speak.
Right.
And it really is. And, to a lot of people, it doesn't sound very beautiful. To me, it's one of the most beautiful languages ever. But I think that's just because of that. It was the first time I was immersed in a completely different language. That was quite crazy at that age to be in a country where you don't understand anything that is going on.
Did you become comfortable with that remoteness? Did you enjoy being in the middle of nowhere, or was it sometimes a bit of a hindrance for you?
I did actually, and I think it helped because I did have the organization where I was placed to work in was in a slightly bigger town, which was only a 10-15 minute train ride away. So I was always able to go to that bigger town where you had bars and shops and restaurants and things like that. And then I did quite a few trips to Copenhagen as well, and that always felt like the biggest city in the world, even though it is quite a small city, of course. So I think I got used to that, and I had all these opportunities to break out of it. And it was a nice change, and it did prepare me a bit for, what came after as well, I think. I mean, it is the smallest place I've ever lived in. But yeah, I did get used to it. And I do sometimes now feel like maybe I'm ready for that life again.
So with that particular volunteer experience, would that be something that you recommend for someone of that age group to go and do something like that?
Absolutely. What is really cool about it is that it doesn't require, so many other exchange programs are tied to education where you have to be in school or you have to be at university or in an apprenticeship or in college or things like that. Whereas that is really, the European Voluntary Service is something that is for someone who doesn't have any other education or training going on. So it's something that anyone can do, and it's really aimed at people who might not have the opportunity to go abroad in other ways. So it wasn't aimed at people like me necessarily, although at that point I didn't know I was going to study and move abroad. But it is aimed at people who just want to have that experience outside of another kind of other parameters. And it was such a great experience, and there's so many different projects, and you can go further than Europe as well. A friend of mine did it in India and worked for an organization there, so they do have opportunities that go outside of Europe as well. But it's also nice to see another European country. I think whenever I said, oh, I volunteered for a year, people thought, oh, you go to an Asian country or somewhere in Africa and you have to do this whole white savior kind of volunteering thing. And I was like, no, I was in Denmark and I worked with children to do theatre and art, and it's just living in another place within the European Union was such a great experience, and it really made me appreciate the European Union and the opportunities it gives to young people.
Experience not only for you, but also for the beneficiaries that you were there to support.
Absolutely. And, a lot of the stuff that I did was admin and helping with editing photos and uploading photos. So things that were just tasks that people didn't have very much time for in the organization where I worked. But I also got to just play with kids. But it wasn't in any way, we weren't made to feel like this is the best thing that ever happens to these kids. It was just something that, they offered to the schools to participate in. So it was a give and take, and I really enjoyed that about it.
Okay, cool. So before we move on from Denmark, what was the number one place or most exciting experience you had while you were there for the year?
I went to Legoland.
Legoland, there you go.
It was I feel really old now saying this, but
you were 18 at the time.
Well, Legoland was just something so important when I grew up. My brothers loved Legos, so there was Legos in the house all the time. So when I went to Denmark and I found out that there's a Legoland not too far from where I am, I was like, I need to go there. So when my parents came over for a visit, I went to Legoland with them and did all the rides, and you could build Legos and you could buy Legos, and there was just Lego everywhere, and I was in heaven. It was great.
Fantastic. So there you go, everyone. If you want to have a real amazing experience in Denmark, go to Legoland.
There are also nice natural places though, so it's not all just about little colourful bricks.
Exactly. So where to after Denmark, Kathy?
So I went back to Vienna after that to start university. And because I loved the language, I actually started to study Scandinavian studies.
Right. Cool. Right.
And the degree took about 4 years. 4 years I also went on an exchange semester abroad.
And where was that to?
That was in Iceland.
Iceland. Now, here's a destination that I get asked about quite frequently on the show. I've had people say to me, when are you going to get somebody on the show that's been to Iceland? I want to know about Iceland. So here we go. You're the person that's on the show now with some history in Iceland. So first of all, what was the opportunity that you went to Iceland with?
So I did an Erasmus semester. Again, that's an EU program for university students to go abroad and study at a university in another country. Mm-hmm. And because I was studying Scandinavian studies, we had quite a lot of partner programs within the Scandinavian countries, of course. Funny enough, I was the only person in my year who applied to go to Iceland, something that now would be unimaginable.
Yeah, it's become a really trendy place. I remember when I lived in Europe for over 10 years, Iceland was the place where everybody went to party. Reykjavik had such a name for clubbing and everything else that you can possibly imagine that literally in the weekends planes would fill up from all over Europe and everybody would go there for the weekend to party. Is it still like that now?
It's a great party scene, I have to say that. I mean, I was there 10 years ago.
Right.
So it was 2010. It was just after the financial crisis kind of clamped down, which is, I think, why at that point I was actually able to go, because it wasn't that expensive anymore. It was still expensive, but it wasn't actually as ridiculously expensive as it was before the financial crisis. But yeah, the party scene was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, the weekends there are just absolute mayhem.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you were in Reykjavik, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So how was adjustment to life in Iceland? Tell us about some of the first, emotional things that happened when you arrived there.
It was really hard in the beginning because I arrived just after New Year. So in early January, it was very dark. I arrived, I think, on a Saturday or Sunday or something, and my university course started on the Monday. Before the semester started, we had kind of like a week-long block lecture series, and I was at uni from 10 to 3 every day, and the sun only rose at 11 and went down by 3:30, 4. So the first week was really difficult because adjusting to the darkness, not even so much the cold, but just the darkness, and not being actually able to explore much of the city because I was stuck at uni. That was a bit hard. Again, being in a place where the language was just so different from anything I had ever seen, even so different from Danish and Norwegian, which I learned at uni. So yeah, it was quite intense. And I lived in a flat with 9 other students, so that was quite crazy as well.
Only 9?
Yeah, well, there was 10 of us and 2 kitchens and 2 bathrooms, and that was not enough.
I was going to say, you'd have to get up at 3 a.m. in the morning to stand in queue for the bathroom.
Yeah, it was not very pleasant. But it was a great community. Everyone was from different countries around the world, and we all got along really well, so it was actually quite lucky. We were a good crew. So yeah, arriving in Iceland and having a very welcoming home space and very welcoming team at university and lecturers and so on. It was actually really, really lovely.
It's interesting, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the different places that you've lived today on the show, because when you arrive in a place and you're there for holiday reasons versus being there to live and work or volunteer or do whatever you're doing, there's a completely different mindset associated with that, isn't there? Because you're looking at the place through more of a permanency in your eyes, whereas you arrive there for travel, you don't really know. You might notice that it's dark and all the rest of it, but you're only going to be there for a short period of time, versus having to settle in and get accustomed to these sorts of things that are going on. What about the cold? It must have been really freezing when you arrived as well at that time of the year.
It's actually interesting because Iceland kind of just about lies on the way of the Gulf Stream. So the south coast and Reykjavik is actually not as cold as you would imagine.
Right.
It wasn't that cold. We didn't have a lot of snow in that year either. And we actually had quite, mild weather most of the winter. But of course it was cold and it was icy. And the fun thing is in Reykjavik, they have hot air and hot water as much as they want coming directly out of the earth. So heating is free.
Yep.
You could heat. I've never heated my room that much. And what they do with all the excess heating water is they kind of build their pipes they kind of snake it around underneath the walkways, so that the hot excess water coming from the heaters in the houses actually defreezes all the walkways.
Brilliant.
Finding the routes from my flat to university where there was ice-free walkways, where I wouldn't fall on my face. That was one of the first things I did. And absolutely, as you say, like when you arrive somewhere to live there, the things that are important to you, the things you want to find out immediately, are very, very different from when you arrive somewhere on a holiday. So finding where the supermarkets are, how the bus system works, where's my nearest local park, where is how expensive are restaurants, where's the bars with the happy hours and things like that. Like that's more important than anything else. Really.
Are you somebody that adjusts pretty quickly to living in a new place? How long roughly would it take you to say to, kind of wake up one morning and feel comfortable that you know your way around, you know where to get stuff and all the rest of it when you move to a new city?
I feel like I adjust fairly quickly. I mean, you can hear from my accent that even linguistically I adjust quite well to my surroundings without really trying. I'm not trying to do a Scottish accent. It's just something that happens. I feel like I'm the kind of person that adjusts very quickly. As soon as I have like I said, my ducks in a row, knowing where to get the things that I need to feel comfortable and at home. I settle in quite quickly. So even in Iceland, even though it was dark, even though everyone was new and I didn't understand very much, it felt like home very quickly. And I still think back of that room that I had, and where we lived. And I sometimes look at it on Google, Google Earth, and see the house where we used to live. It's home. It does feel like home still.
So while you were there studying, did you have a lot of spare time to get out and about and check out the country? Because, a lot of people maybe look at Iceland as one-dimensional with Reykjavik, but I think in terms of getting out and actually exploring a lot of the places, what really holds the wonder to Iceland, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Reykjavik is a cool city, and there's a lot of really nice things to do there, and it's very pretty as well. But it was great because the university organized regular bus tours for some of the exchange students. So we went to the Blue Lagoon, and we went out to various volcanic peninsulas, and so on and so forth. So we did get out with them. But then also because some of the people I lived with were there for a year or for even longer for their master's degrees. So they already knew more about the country than me. We could rent cars. We drove out to see, to go hiking to the hot springs, or we took a bus somewhere and went up a mountain, things like that. I did get about a lot. And then I did a 3-week holiday as well around the entire Ring Road, where we just saw so much. And it was already kind of springtime in the south, but then the further north we got, it was still a lot of snow. I think in April. That was just before the volcano broke out, if you remember that.
Yeah.
The night the volcano broke out, I was at a Peaches concert in Reykjavik.
Oh, wow.
I remember that, and then the next day everyone started wearing masks. It was crazy.
Yeah, I bet.
But we never had smoke in the city, so it all just blew down to Europe. So that was handy.
Thank goodness for the jet stream again.
Exactly.
So for people listening who want to visit Iceland, in terms of getting around, would you suggest that self-drive's the best way to go, or would you say hop on a tour and get around that way?
I think it depends a bit on how much time you have and what time of the year you visit as well. I would say that if you visit in the deepest of winter, or when there's still a lot of snow on the roads and you're not comfortable driving on ice and roads and on ice and snow, get a tour. Join a tour, particularly when it's about wanting to see the Northern Lights or just some of the highlights on the Golden Circle or some of the waterfalls in South Iceland. I think it's a lot of hassle and it's very stressful to drive in those kind of conditions when you're not used to it. On the other hand, if you have a lot of time and you visit in the summer and you're quite a comfortable driver, I think a car is just the best way to go off the beaten track, to see the things that are not only on the main road and aren't only the main attractions.
A lot of people go to that part of the world to see the Northern Lights, of course, as you've just mentioned.
Well, I mean, leaving Reykjavik is good because you have less light pollution. The farther you go north is also better, but you can see them pretty much anywhere. We lived right across from a big park, and on a night with a good forecast, we would just head down to the park, and I saw them in the middle of Reykjavik as well. So you can see them pretty much anywhere. It's just about checking the forecasts. You need the right temperature, you need a clear sky, and you need the right sun activity, and that's something you can predict very well. You can, obviously there's aurora forecasts, but when you plan your holiday, you can't predict whether or not it's going to happen. So it is a chance to see them, and you have to be very lucky, I think. But when you do see them, it's beautiful. And they do really dance.
What was your first impression in terms of how it impacted you? Did it live up to expectation?
You mean the Northern Lights or Iceland?
Yeah, Northern Lights, yeah.
The Northern Lights definitely lived up to everything. As I said, they do really dance, and when you get strong lights, they are green, they are red, they can be blue and purple, and it's just incredible, and it makes you wonder what people thought they were, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when they didn't have the scientific knowledge to back that up. It is magical and it's beautiful, and I've seen them a few times since. I've seen them in Canada as well, And apparently you can see them in Scotland too, but I've never been that lucky.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. You could see them in Scotland. Question about your time in Iceland. Did you see Jason Bourne?
No.
Part of the movie was shot in Iceland. I remember watching and going, oh, if I go, I might see Jason Bourne there.
That's funny. No, we didn't. I didn't even meet Björk.
Oh, you didn't? Oh.
No, sadly. I mean, I think she lives in New York, so it's fair enough.
Yeah, well, I thought she's down the local pub every Friday night having a bit of a sing-along.
That would have been cool.
Yeah. So what was your kind of summary of your days in Iceland? Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I absolutely loved it. I went back a few years later, in 2015, on a winter holiday. And I've been dying to go back ever since. I wanted to go this year for the Airwaves Festival, which is in Reykjavik every November.
Yeah, right. I've heard of that. Yeah. Is it good? I haven't been yet.
I've never been, but I always listen to the recordings, and it must be absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, for various reasons, we're not going this year, but I hope maybe next year we can go. Because the music scene in Iceland is just one of a kind, and the festival sounds really cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just such a fascinating country. I just think it became so much more popular in the last few years that it became more expensive again, and it might be a bit harder to go off the beaten track and escape the tourist crowds, but I would love to go back. Some of the landscapes in Iceland, it's just like being on the moon, or on Mars, and it just doesn't feel like you're still on Earth. It's, yeah, as you said, it's like traveling to another planet. It's fascinating.
Okay, so let's continue on with your United Nations tour of the world. Where did you go to? Where did you go to next?
So after Iceland, I went back to Vienna for about a year and a half to finish my degree, my bachelor's degree, and then after that, I moved to.
Okay, before we start talking about your time in Berlin, what was the goal when you were at college and university in terms of dream job? What did you want to do?
So as I said, I studied Scandinavian studies, but I didn't mention that I also did drama, film and media studies.
Right.
So, and because when I was in Denmark, I worked at a cultural institution that did kind of arts projects for children and organized these across the country. So that was something I was really inspired by, organizing bigger projects that have to do and engage people of all ages with arts. And that could be theatre, that could be painting, that could be role plays, game design, all sorts of things. So that really inspired me. And so when I started studying drama, film and media studies, I was really interested in how people engage with media and with arts. So working, for example, with film festivals or organizing arts projects for schools, things like that. That was kind of what I would have loved to do.
Where has your artistic flair come from? Have you got someone in the family that's an artistic person?
My dad's a carpenter, and has been for all of his life. And I think because at the time when he learned to be a carpenter, when he trained to be a carpenter up until when I was born, it was very common, things like IKEA didn't really exist then. It was people bought, handmade pieces of furniture from professionals. And so his style of furniture that he made was very much artistic and very intricate designs, and just not something you would just go to a big furniture shop nowadays and buy it from there. So I think that always kind of inspired me in the back of my head to do something where you can feel the love that goes into the labor of it.
That's very cool. I'm sure your dad would be proud of that.
I don't know. Well, it's funny because before I went to uni, I thought I would maybe also do something in that direction, not necessarily become a carpenter, but do furniture design, or restoring old furniture, things like. He wasn't too excited about that. He wanted me to go to university.
Have you told him that he's been part of your inspiration?
I don't think I ever have. I probably should.
I'm thinking it'd be rapt to find out what you just told me. Yeah, that's very beautiful for a daughter to tell her father exactly what you just said about where you got some of your inspiration from.
I will do that.
I think it'll make his day. probably is week or month.
I will do that next time I speak to them.
Yeah, good idea. Let me know how it goes. I'd love to hear what your father's reaction is.
Will do.
Thank you. Okay, so Berlin, now it's got to be in the top 10 of my favourite cities around the world. And let's hear about your experience in beautiful Berlin.
Berlin is a great city. I love it. But it's massive. It is, coming from Vienna, which is a big city, it just felt like the biggest place you could ever live in. There's so many people, and it's on the surface area. It's such a geographically widespread and massive city. And it's a lot of fun, Berlin is the kind of place where you move to have a lot of fun, and you try a lot of different things. And very soon you might realize whether that's for you or not. But it is a lot of fun. I do really enjoy it, and I do go back frequently because I have friends there, and I sometimes still work in the city. So it will always have a very important place in my heart.
I love the way you're very diplomatic about it. We can actually say that it is the experimental capital of Europe.
Yeah, I always like to refer to it as Peter Pan City.
Yes, that's a very good description indeed. But in terms of culture and arts, and, it's the Mecca, isn't it, really, as far as Europe goes for that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it comes to, opportunities to just try things and collaborate with other people on their projects. A lot of people move to Berlin to, just find the space and find the people to collaborate with on crazy projects that they've always dreamed about. So there's a lot going on, whether it's experimental theatre or film clubs, all sorts of stuff. Street art. The street art scene is fantastic in Berlin. So there's a lot going on that you can get immersed in and that you can try out, and that's really fun.
Culturally, how much different is it to Austria?
Oh, it's very different. It is very different. On the one hand, you have a very different kind of accent, so the language, I always stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, the good thing is people in Berlin really like people from Vienna, apparently. They like our accent, which is not something you can say about many other places in Austria. They don't like us very much. But so they always appreciated my accent, but I always felt like an outsider because I sounded so different. And then, there's just little things like the way you describe the time, or the way, the kinds of food you speak. People in Berlin can be very blunt. They can be very straightforward and tell you exactly what they think without being rude. But it is something you would never do in Vienna. In Vienna, you're rude behind someone's back. You never say it to their face. It's a very different culture, the way we deal with each other. So it was quite interesting to be exposed to people who are just completely different.
I've heard a number of times Berliners described as the New Yorkers of Europe. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. I've never been to New York.
You've never been to New York?
No.
Whoa.
So why did they say that?
Well, New Yorkers are fairly well known around the globe to be fairly blunt and direct people, and I think if you were to convert that into a European standard, if you could do such a thing, then I think that there might be some similarities within the Berliners.
That sounds about right. Yeah, I would agree. People are very, very blunt on the subways as well. If you do something or if you say something they don't like, they will turn around and tell you.
Yeah. Hey, I've got to ask you to come back on the show after you've been to New York the first time.
I would love to.
Because
are you going to pay for my trip?
I want to see how wide your eyes are open after you've been to New York.
I'd love to go to New York. I've been to the West Coast a few times, but I've never actually been to the East Coast.
It changes you as a person going to New York.
All right. Well, you've set the bar quite high.
There you go. So how long did you live in Berlin for?
Only about a year. When I moved there, I didn't have a deadline. I moved there indefinitely. I thought I would stay there for a longer, but I realized pretty quickly that it was just too big and it was too vast and there was too many too many possibilities without proper opportunities, if that makes sense. So that you could try a lot of different things, but finding work that was actually fairly paid or interesting enough to, in the area that I really wanted to do, it was quite hard. I could have maybe tried a bit longer, but I very quickly got this idea in my head that I wanted to do a master's in an English-speaking country. So within half a year in Berlin, I started applying for master's programs in Scotland, actually.
Right. It's interesting how some of these cities around the world, and Berlin's one of them that you've just described, are quite cities that have a lot of randomness going on. They've got a big transient population as well, where people are coming and going, and both from within Germany and outside of Germany. And people are searching for something in their life at that particular time, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's funny because I do have friends in Berlin, and I know a few people who are actually, who grew up in Berlin, who were born there. But as you say, the majority are people who are there for a short period of time, or for a year or a couple of years. It can be quite hard to make valuable long-term connections in a place like that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's also why I felt a bit not at home so much. I do love Berlin. I love going there, and I go back at least once a year normally. But it just never felt as home as other places did.
So after there, did you go straight to Scotland?
Yes, so I moved straight from Berlin to Glasgow.
Well, there's a big change.
Yes. Yes.
My goodness, going from Berlin to Scotland to Glasgow in particular. There are a lot of really big differences, but in many ways, Glasgow has some feel that is similar to Berlin. You have a lot of street art here as well. It is a bit of an underdog. It's more about the local culture than the attractions. That's what Edinburgh is for. I actually find that if I had to compare places in my head, I usually say that Edinburgh is more like Vienna. It's a bit more highbrow, it's a bit more touristy, it's more pretty than experiential. And then you've got Glasgow, and that's a bit more like Berlin. It's more about the locals, it's more about the local culture, not so much about the sightseeing, and it's a bit gritty. That's a good description. No, I think when I sit and listen to you talk about it like that, I would say, yeah, but I'd say also on a high level, if you actually looked at the differences between the, culturally speaking, as a tourist, you're going from one pot to the other, really.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah.
And, German culture and Scottish culture are so different.
Yeah.
And in some ways, Austrian culture is closer to Scottish culture than the German ones. So yeah, it's a funny way of moving around and trying to compare these things, because it's just not, it's not black and white.
Yeah. So how long have you been in Scotland now?
So 6.5 years.
Okay, and in that time you've done everything except for leading the Scottish Parliament. So how about we talk about some of those things? When did you start your travel blog?
So I started my own blog about 4 years ago, which was about 1.5, 2 years into my time in Scotland.
What was the inspiration behind starting the travel blog?
It's actually quite funny, because I was writing for another international travel blog that covered, destinations all around the world, and I started writing for them when I was in Berlin, and I went on a lot of trips. I traveled to a lot of places and wrote about them all around the world, really. And then when I moved to Scotland, I started doing fewer and fewer of those trips. I moved here for my master's, as I said, and then started my PhD. And then really because of the way the PhD program worked, I just couldn't travel that far as often anymore. And I started to write more and more about Scotland. And at some point, my editor said to me, Kathy, please stop writing about Scotland. We need other topics as well and other destinations. It's just too much. And I turned around and said, well, cool, I'll just start my own blog then. And I kept writing for the other platform as well, but I did start writing about Scotland exclusively, or almost exclusively, on my blog.
Do you know what I've learnt in the last couple of weeks about Scotland?
No, please tell me.
I put a note out to get more guests for my podcast show. and within 2 days, I had 7 travel bloggers from Scotland contact me.
Well, I think we all know who to thank for that.
But it makes me wonder whether there's more travel bloggers per capita in Scotland than there are any other country in the world.
Maybe we just like to talk a lot.
I think that's the other thing, actually. I think that's true.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a great little community in Scotland of travel bloggers who live here. There's a lot of Scotland travel bloggers who talk about the country, but then there's just loads and loads of people here. The Scots always have loved to travel, I've learned in the last few years. It's a seafaring nation. The Scottish people are all over the world, and lots of people from all over the world have Scottish roots. And then obviously Gemma, who was on your show a few weeks ago, or days ago, I don't know, said to our community, "Oh, my friend's looking for podcast guests," and I think we all just jumped on that.
No, but in all seriousness, I think it's a wonderful thing, because Scotland is a place where there's so much going on anyway, and I think there's still so much undiscovered about Scotland from the normal tourist, because there's so many things that you can do in Scotland that people probably just are not aware of.
Absolutely. I mean, I think from all the places that I've ever lived in, I've only lived in very small countries. I don't know if you've seen that trend, apart from Germany, of course. But the places where I stayed for longer are all fairly small. And I think Scotland is one of those where it really stuck with me that it's known for a handful of things and a handful of destinations. And that's all people think about. That's all people talk about. That's all people want to see. But there is so much more out there, and so many different places to discover and explore, and things to experience that you would not have even thought about when you heard the word Scotland.
That's so true. And as I was saying to your dear friend when I was talking to her, that Scotland is more than Billy Connolly and the Loch Ness Monster.
Exactly, absolutely.
Although those two things have quite a reputation. And, I love Billy Connolly. I just think he's my all-time favourite comedian, and probably one of my top 5 favourite human beings, because he's such an amazing ambassador for Scotland as a country, and just the way that he's done his whole, video tours of the world and all the rest of it, it just makes you feel like you're part Scottish somehow. It's really crazy.
Yeah, I think the Scottish people have a way of being welcoming and, receiving other people and taking in other people as if they had always been here. It's a very, very easy place to feel at home. And that's because there's so much warmth and so much, appreciation for people who come from all over the world to live here, to work here, and to visit here. So I do speak to a lot of people, and they all feel that warmth and that feeling of welcome. And I feel, even though I'm not Scottish, I'm very proud that is the impression that people get.
Well, I'm going to stick my neck out now and say that all the places that you've talked about to us today, outside of Vienna, obviously, I'd probably say that you enjoy living in Scotland the most. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm still here. It was only supposed to be a year, and then I thought I would return to Berlin, and here I am 6 years later, and there's no way I'm going to leave.
So what's kept you there? What's been the magnet?
I think there's not really one thing. I think it is that feeling of home that I felt within that first year, where I just felt that this is a place where you're 100% welcome, where there's so much to discover, and there's just that feeling of belonging. Within the first year, when I did my master's, I realized I hadn't really seen very much of Glasgow, because you kind of live in that bubble around the university area. So I initially just said, I'll stay for 1 more year to live somewhere else in the city and to see a bit more of the country. And that just turned into one more, and the PhD, and then I fell in love, and, the rest is kind of history, as they say.
You had time to fall in love with all that going on.
I have time for anything. Give me any task and I'll say yes to it.
How did you meet your partner?
We met on Tinder.
You met on Tinder?
Yes.
My goodness, and it's worked out to be great.
Yeah, I actually
Fantastic.
know quite a few couples, particularly here in Glasgow, who are, happily married or happily, long term together, who met on Tinder. It's great. It works in
Okay.
Scotland.
Well, everybody on Tinder that's listening today, get over to Scotland because
Well, you don't even, they removed their geolocation thing at the moment, so you can flirt around the world. So
you can
get get
flirt
get
around the
get your
world.
Scottish things on.
Okay. So, any of your blog or writing platforms sponsored by Tinder yet?
No, not yet, but they really should think about it.
Okay. So, tell us why someone should go on a walking tour of Glasgow.
I think Glasgow has so much to offer that people have no idea about. The city has a reputation, that it struggles with, that comes from decades and decades ago when the shipyard industry collapsed and there was a lot of unemployment and a lot of crime in the city. But all of that has changed dramatically in the last kind of 2 or 3 decades. So getting people to forget everything they'd ever heard anywhere and just immersing themselves in the city. And the walking tour is great because it is such a walkable city and you get a good feeling of the layout of everything. And I usually do my walking tours. I start in the oldest part of the city where you see the medieval cathedral and you get a sense of what the city was like back then in the medieval times. And then slowly I walk into the more modern areas, the more modern 18th, 19th century city centre that we have today. You see the financial district with the very new buildings, and you just get this clash of different times and different cultures coming together. Along the way, you see street art, you see beautiful architecture, you meet people. Regardless of where you are in Glasgow, whether you go to the pub or you just walk down the street, you will have a local chat to you at some point. And that's what I really like about it. And those walking tours are a good way to see Glasgow, but not only see, the traditional sites, but really get a sense for the city.
How long have you been doing the walking tours for?
For about 2 years now.
And how's it going?
It's going really well. I mean, obviously not at the moment, but I do get a lot of people from the States who come on these tours with me, but also from Germany because I offer them in German and in English. And it's because of the way I do them. They're always private, so it's very, personal and very intimate. People always are interested to hear about what it's like to actually live in this city and how it compares to other places. So it's really lovely, and I do really enjoy it. And I always ask people in the beginning of the tours what they knew about Glasgow or why they decided to come here, what they thought they would expect. And most of them have a completely different answer by the end of the tour, and that's really nice.
To do the walking tours, what was the inspiration behind that?
It was really the recurring questions that I got about Glasgow from people who came to read my blog was, is it dangerous? What is there even to see? What is there even to do? And that really inspired me to create something where I can, as you hear, I'm very passionate about Glasgow and Scotland as a whole. I just wanted to have something where I could share that passion with people who read all these articles from 15, not even 15, 25 years ago, of these, opinions about a city that were rooted in something that doesn't even exist anymore. So I really wanted to change that, image of the city.
So, how does someone find your walking tours? Where do they go to?
The easiest is to go on my website, watchmesee.com. There's a section where you can see my travel itinerary planning services and also my walking tours. Or you can just email me. Because all of the tours are private, you have to email me anyways to book a tour, to arrange a date and a time that works for everyone. So the easiest is just to email me.
I'm going to put, for everybody listening today, I'm going to put all the links to Kathy's online platforms in the show notes. So you're going to be able to get all of those from there. So you don't have to write anything down right now. Okay, so talk about film festivals and your passion for the film industry, albeit all there in Scotland. Tell me what's happening.
Scotland has a great film landscape. On the one hand, there's great film productions going on. We have TV stations and film studios that create films and TV shows in Scottish, or in English, but also in Scottish Gaelic, for the Gaelic-speaking part of the population. We have a lot of big international film productions coming and shoot here. So there's a lot of films that were shot in Scotland, which is exciting. And then you've got lots and lots of festivals. Glasgow is a very creative city. It's a very thriving art scene. And there are many festivals, and any topic you can think about, there's a festival for it, whether it's documentaries, human rights, environmental justice, African cinema, queer cinema, short films, and also feminist films, which is thanks to a festival that I started with a friend of mine, which is a feminist film festival. So we screen films by women here in Glasgow and have a lot of discussions about them. So for film lovers, it's a really great city to come to, and almost every month you can attend a different festival.
Do you get many men coming to the Feminist Film Festival?
I mean, the majority of our guests are normally women, but we do get men. It's open to everyone. Everyone is welcome. And it's actually really good to see more and more men coming to our events as well and participating in these really important conversations and listening to, the issues that are discussed about in these films. Because it is something that affects us all, and it is something that everyone needs to participate if we want to change it.
I want to go back to you talking about film productions in Scotland. Was Jason Bourne shot in Scotland?
I actually don't know. Are you obsessed with Jason Bourne?
I am. Yeah. A friend said to me the other day, "How long are you going to do this podcasting thing for?" And I said, "Until I get signed up as the next Jason Bourne."
Well, good luck with that.
I just put a boxing bag on the back of my boat yesterday to start training harder to get a body like he's got.
Well, you gotta have the body first before you can try to apply for the role. So
yeah, I asked you about filming in Scotland because I don't know if I have to kind of train getting a Scottish accent for the parts. That's all.
I don't know. I think people would rather you keep your accent and just put a kilt on or something. That works.
Okay, good. So now let's tap into the humble side of you, because you're a Tourism Influencer of the Year award winner.
Oh dear, yes.
How does one win that award? That sounds very prestigious.
It's actually a really cool initiative. So there is an organisation called Women in Tourism Scotland, and it's all about women who work in the tourism industry here, working together, sharing experiences and elevating each other's work throughout the tourism industry. And Scotland always has, every 2 years, there's a theme that runs through various aspects of Scotland, politics as well as culture, tourism and so on. And in 2018, that theme was Year of Young People. And for this year, the Women in Tourism Scotland organisation started an award series where they would highlight the work that young women in the tourism industry are doing here in Scotland. And one of the categories was for tourism influencer or blogger of the year. And so I applied for that because I think it is really important that women support each other and that we amplify each other's voices. And obviously also, work like you do. You said, I think on Facebook I saw that you posted that 80% of your guests are women, which I think is fantastic because even though there are so many women working in these fields, I feel like we still need that help to elevate our voices and make them louder and give them more platforms, because the biggest platforms are still often only given to men. So I think that kind of work is really important. And so I was very, very honoured when I got that award.
Well, I want to congratulate you from my own little world, because I think it's a wonderful achievement, and I agree with everything you've just mentioned about elevating women's work. And I'm really quite proud that I've had 80% women on my show without really knowing it, because one, I find it extremely interesting to talk to women about their travel experiences, because, and I don't want to sound too shallow when I say this, but women seem to describe places they've been to in a different way than men do, and they tend to make it a little bit more interesting. And I'm generalizing here, but I've just found that as a natural course of impact that I've had since I've been doing my show. So yeah, it's great, and I would like to do whatever I can to encourage it. I've got some of my own podcast show awards coming up soon, and I'm going to recognise women in those awards because I think that's important as well.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's really interesting that you say you feel that women describe places differently. I would agree. I think it's hard to put your finger down on it, and obviously there, as you say, you can't generalize it that well. But it is quite interesting. It's similar with nature writing or writing about outdoor adventures, that I just find there's just an element to the way women describe these things that I find more approachable. I always thought that's because I am a woman, but if you feel similar, that's quite...
I'd go one step further and say out of those 80% of women that I've had on my show, I would say that 95% of the travel bloggers I've had on my show have been women.
Well, there's lots of us.
Yeah. So let's keep it going. Now, I didn't ask you, and I should have. What is the date of the Feminist Film Festival in Glasgow? When does it take place?
So we take place in the kind of late winter, early spring. So in our first year, we had it in March. This year, we were in February. And in 2021, we'll be in February again. On the top of my head, I think it's the 18th to the 21st of February, 2021.
Okay, but people can find those details on your website?
Exactly, yeah. So the festival is called Femspectives, like perspectives, but Femspectives.
Okay.
And I'll give you the link to put in the show notes.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, good. Now, you're doing quite a number of different things under your portfolio. So what's your full-time gig? What's your main course of action at the moment?
So the travel blog is really the main, my main job. I consider myself a full-time travel blogger.
Yeah.
And anything that relates to that, what I do in the tourism industry. But the festival is growing. We do a lot of projects. So it's starting to become a bit more of my time is going towards the film festival as well.
And has the local tourist board got behind the film festival and starting to offer you some grants and stuff?
Not yet. We do get funding from the local kind of arts funding body, which is great and helps a lot with putting the festival on. But for now, we're really focused on the local audiences and not so much on bringing loads of people into the city for it. We're still very small. It's only been our second year this year, so maybe in the future.
Okay, good. Well, we're going to watch it grow with enthusiasm because I'm sure it's going to. Now, I asked this question of all the travel bloggers I have on my show. Where is your travel blog going to be, do you think, in 5 years from now?
I find that difficult to answer because of the current situation. I think what I really want to see for my travel blog to happen is become even more the number one source of information about Scotland. I'm very passionate about getting people off the beaten track, getting people to do outdoor activities and actually immerse themselves in what I think is the biggest asset of Scotland, which is our nature and our outdoor environments. So I think I would like to see the blog grow in that direction, working even closer with activity providers, and potentially even branching out into nearby destinations, because Scotland is obviously we're on an island, but we're so well connected to places like Ireland, Northern Ireland, England, Wales. You can fly up to Iceland, to the Faroe Islands, hop over to the Netherlands. There's so much you can do from here that I think there's a lot of potential to grow in those directions.
Do you know how many islands there are officially in Scotland?
Yes, I do. I heard it on the podcast with Janet, but I also with Janice, but I didn't know before that as well. 790.
Exactly, yeah.
But that's inhabited and uninhabited. I think there's only about over 100.
Correct.
150
Correct.
or so.
Correct. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw this at you and see what you think. I'd like to get 3 or 4 of you back from Scotland and have a bit of a fun comedy quiz about Scotland between all the travel bloggers up there.
Okay.
Are you up for that?
I'd be keen for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we'll round up your foe up there and we'll have a bit of a chat and see whether we can get a few of them on the line, and we'll have a little bit of a quiz going on and see who's the most outstanding travel blogger knowledge-wise in Scotland at the moment.
Oh, God. We're all going to have to put our war paint on.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, Kathy, our time has flown past and I've enjoyed so much having a chat to you today. It's been fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed this particular experience of being a podcast guest. Have you done so?
I have, very much indeed. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much for having me on. It's nice to speak about so many different topics in such a short amount of time.
It is, and I'm going to leave you with 2 pieces of homework that I'd like you to do after the show today. The first one is, well, actually, no, it's 3 pieces I've written down here. The first one is have a chat to your dad about how inspiring he is. Second one is start planning your trip to New York City and come back on the show and tell me all about it. And the third one is have a chat to your fellow travel bloggers and find out whether they're interested in having a bit of a comedy chat about Scotland.
I will do all these things. That's really nice.
And who knows, we might even be able to sell it to the Scottish Tourism Board and they can use it for some publicity purposes.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today, and I wish you safe times ahead and lots of fun as well. And thanks for giving us a big rundown on your life journey.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye. The delightful Kathy Kamlitner was joining me today from beautiful Glasgow in Scotland. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Had a little bit of everything for everybody. Travel bloggers, a bit about Iceland, Germany, Denmark, and of course beautiful Vienna. If you haven't been to those places, book a ticket when we can all fly again, because they are all outstanding places to visit. If you're looking for more podcasts from the Global Travel Channel, all you have to do is go over to the website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You can download the podcast, and for people who don't know how to do that, you go to places like Apple iTunes under the podcast section, or you download apps like Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Castbox, Google Play. It's very easy. All these things are linked on our website to help you download the podcast easier. If you enjoy the content, please tell someone about it and ask them why aren't they listening to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. We do want to have our listenership around the world increase as much as we possibly can. We're currently listened to in 95 countries and we would love to break through the 100 barrier. So if you can help us with that, that'd be tremendous. Okay, well, that's it for this particular episode. My name is Mark Philpott, and I'm already looking forward to coming back next time and bringing you another podcast show on the Global Travel Channel podcast show. Until then, I wish you all a very happy and safe week ahead.